The skies of Vilia 9 were the color of rust. Every dawn bled red across the horizon, filtered through the iron-laden storms that swept endlessly across the mining plains. To most citizens of the Imperium, it was a forgotten world, a supply point buried within the Segmentum Obscurus, known only for its vast ore deposits and a monthly tithe of promethium fuel. But beneath that desolate sky, something unseen had begun to breathe. It started in the deep shafts, a miner coughing between hammer strikes, a medici warning ignored, a supervisor too concerned about quotas to question the blood on his crew's lips. The first report logged by the overseer's office read simply, "Flu-like symptoms among Sector 12 workers. No fatalities. Recommend containment." It was dated 3 weeks before the transmissions went silent. The miners themselves noticed before the officials did. They spoke of a smell in the tunnels, not the usual tang of ozone or the sharpness of machine oil, but something wet and foul, like the breath of a corpse. The air recyclers groaned, filters clogged with an oily residue that no one could identify. They burned incense and prayed to the Emperor, but the odor returned, stronger each day. In the dark, the coughing grew. One by one, the miners collapsed beside their drills, fevered and delirious. When the medici came, she found their veins glowing faintly beneath the skin, pulsing green like veins of infected ore. She sent blood samples to the planetary capital, but the servitors carrying the vials never arrived. By the time word reached Governor Fala's Corin, a pragmatic man with the hollow eyes of someone who had long forgotten sleep, the infection had spread beyond the mines. It crept through hab blocks, across mess halls, into the water tanks and air ducts. Workers in the upper levels began to develop lesions along their arms, soft blisters that burst with the faint hiss of escaping gas. The smell, that impossible, crawling smell, became the scent of the planet itself. Corin convened an emergency council in the palace's highest spire. He wore a rebreather mask, though it gave little comfort. Around him sat his staff, the chief medici, a silent Adeptus Mechanicus liaison, and the head of the local Astra Militarum garrison, Captain Cern Val. "Lock the mines," Corin ordered. "Burn everything below level 4. If we can stop the spread before the next tithe inspection, we can contain this without external oversight." Val frowned beneath his respirator. "And if we can't, my lord?" Corin's gloved hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the mask. "Then we seal the transports, send our output, and say nothing. The Imperium does not forgive weakness or disease." The Mechanicus liaison, a pale tech adept whose voice buzzed through a vox implant, leaned forward. "Governor, I advise caution. I detect anomalous machine degradation patterns. This is not mere plague. It corrodes metal. Reclaimers found servitors rusting from within, their fluids turned to sludge. Something in this contagion defies categorization." Corin's eyes narrowed. "Then categorize it before it categorizes us." Outside the palace, the city of Kana's Reach had begun to choke. The wind carried more than dust now, spores, invisible and patient. Children awoke with their eyes sealed shut by filmy residue. Priests in the chapel of the Emperor's Light began coughing mid-sermon. The shrines that once glittered with gold were streaked with damp corrosion. At first, the people prayed louder, believing faith itself would purify the air. But as the days passed, the prayers grew weaker. Faith could not mask the rot. In the market square, a preacher stood on a crate and shouted until his throat bled. "The Emperor protects, the Emperor heals. Do not fear this trial, for it is only." His words broke off in a wet cough. When he raised his hand to wipe the blood, his flesh peeled like wax. The crowd fled screaming, trampling one another in their panic. Meanwhile, in the palace medici bay, Dr. Lyra Ven sat alone among dozens of sealed body bags. She had been dissecting corpses for days, searching for answers that refused to exist. The infection made no biological sense. It spread even through sterilized surfaces, resisted every antibiotic, and behaved like both a fungus and a sentient virus. Her datapad flickered with corrupted readings, heart tissue that pulsed after death, cells that multiplied even when burnt. Once, she swore she heard something, faint whispering through the Auspex speakers like breath beneath static. "The gift is spreading." She tore off her earpiece and whispered a prayer, "Emperor, preserve us." That night the first riots began. Families barricaded themselves inside their homes as coughing echoed through the streets. Fires burned across the lower sectors, pyres built by terrified citizens trying to cleanse the infection. The governor's troops shot anyone attempting to flee the quarantine zones. Still, the smell spread, sweet and rotting. A week later, Corin received a transmission from orbit. The Imperial freighter St. Haldren's Mercy, scheduled for pickup, had arrived early and was requesting docking clearance. Corin hesitated, contact risked exposure, but refusal could draw attention from off-world authorities. He gave the order. The docking clamps sealed, and for a brief moment, the city believed rescue had come. The freighter's crew descended in hazmat suits, greeted by desperate colonists begging for evacuation. But as they walked through the airlocks, the smell hit them. They saw the stains on the walls, dark, pulsing like old wounds, and the bodies left in the open streets, wrapped in sheets that twitched. They never went back to their ship. Within hours, St. Haldren's Mercy fell silent too. In the tunnels below, where the infection had first been born, something began to stir. The miners who had vanished weeks ago were no longer corpses. They moved, swollen with gas and covered in glistening sores, muttering prayers in voices that sounded both human and mechanical. Their eyes had turned milky green. They worked tirelessly, hammering symbols into the stone, a circle of 3 flies surrounding a skull. They called it the Blessing. One of them, an overseer named Trask, had once been known for his cruelty toward the workers. Now, his voice rasped with devotion as he carved words into the wall with a jagged drill bit. He hears us in the rot, he sees us in the rust, our pain is his joy. In the depths of the mine, a thick pool of liquid metal and blood began to pulse like a living heart. It breathed in the fumes, exhaled mist. The machines around it began to corrode, turning from polished iron to weeping bronze. Each drip fell in rhythm, as though marking time for something ancient and patient. When the Mechanicus Adept descended with a servoskull to investigate, he transmitted one final message before his vox fell silent. The infection is alive, the metal it speaks. 3 days later, the governor's staff stopped attending meetings. The captain of the guard was found slumped over his console, his respirator filled with black mucus. The Mechanicus liaison had vanished entirely, leaving only trails of oil-like residue leading toward the lower levels. Corin locked himself in his chamber, surrounded by incense and holy icons, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He kept recording vox logs, pleas to the administratum, to the Inquisition, to anyone, but the transmissions went unanswered. His final entry, recovered much later by Imperial agents, ended with the sound of whispering. "I can hear them now, not outside. Inside, it's warm, it's beautiful." And then silence. When Father Halbrecht arrived 2 months later, the world was officially marked non-responsive. The administratum believed it to be a labor revolt. The Inquisition suspected Xeno's interference, but no one truly knew what awaited him on the planet's surface. From orbit, Vialia 9 looked almost peaceful, its once grey deserts now tinted with faint green haze, the oceans shimmering oddly as though coated in oil. But the Auspex readings screamed contamination. Life signs fluctuated like heartbeats. Vox signals whispered without origin. Halbrecht crossed himself and spoke softly. The Emperor's light cleanses all darkness. But deep within the rotting world below, the darkness had already learned to speak back. The shuttle's sanctity of dawn pierced the sickly clouds of Vialia 9 like a rusted nail through flesh. Inside, Father Halbrecht sat still in his restraint harness, his fingers clenched tightly around a Rosarius that glowed faintly with golden light. The vibration of descent hummed through the hull, accompanied by the faint static whisper of malfunctioning Vox systems. He could feel the air changing already, thick, damp, alive. Across from him sat Sister Vera, one of the Order of the Argent Shroud, her armor painted white but stained with old battle grime. Her eyes were steady, though Halbrecht could see unease flickering in them. The shuttle's pilot, a servitor with most of its face replaced by metal plating, repeated a single mechanical prayer as the ship cut through turbulence. Blessed be the descent of the faithful, blessed be the will of the Emperor, blessed be the uncorrupted. Halbrecht whispered the final line along with it, a habit of comfort more than faith. The closer they came to the planet, the harder it was to breathe. Even through the filtration mask, the air strung with rot and chemical dust. Father, Vera said, her voice metallic through her helm vox. Why send only us? A world this far gone, it should have been cleansed by fire. Halbrecht didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the flickering image projected on the shuttle's holoscreen, the planetary capital, Kana's Reach. Once a sprawling hive of production towers, it now looked like a scabbed wound. Buildings leaned at odd angles, choked by mossy green growths that pulsed faintly in the light. What had been roads were now canals of sludge, shimmering with oily reflections. He replied, voice low and heavy, "Fire is mercy. The Inquisition does not grant mercy until it has heard confession." Vera said nothing more. The shuttle's engines howled as it entered the lower atmosphere. Through the viewport, the city came into view, or what was left of it. Statues of the Emperor lay toppled, half submerged in slime. Vox towers drooped like wilted flowers. The once-proud banners of the Administratum hung shredded, the Aquila symbol stained brown and green. They landed on what used to be the governor's plaza. The landing ramp groaned open, releasing a hiss of air. Halbrecht stepped out first. The smell struck him like a physical blow, a wet, putrid heaviness that coated his tongue. He could hear flies, though there were no flies to see. The entire city seemed to hum softly, as though alive. Each ruined building exhaled faint clouds of green mist. The priest raised his staff, the silver aquila at its head glowing faintly. "The Emperor's light banishes corruption," he murmured. His words felt swallowed by the air. Vera scanned the surroundings. Her auto-senses pinged faint motion signatures, dozens, maybe hundreds, flickering in and out of existence. "There's movement, Father, everywhere, but no clear source." Halbrecht turned toward the governor's palace. It rose crookedly at the far end of the plaza, its once gleaming walls now eaten through by rust. Streams of brown fluid leaked from the balconies like drool. Above the great gates, the imperial aquila had been defaced, not by blasphemous sigils, but by something stranger. The metal wings appeared to breathe. They entered. Inside, the grand hall was silent, except for the faint dripping of fluid from the ceiling. Every surface was coated in a thin layer of greenish mucus that glittered under the light of Halbrecht's staff. The air was thick with spores, visible as drifting motes. They passed what looked like human forms, not corpses, not exactly. Some stood upright, motionless, their skin stretched thin like parchment over bone, their mouths open as if frozen mid-scream. Others had fused into the walls, veins merging with pipes and cables. A pair of eyes blinked from inside a rusted panel. Vera tightened her grip on her bolter. "By the throne." "Hold your fire," Halbrecht whispered. "These souls may yet be redeemed." Even as he said it, He knew redemption was a fantasy here. They reached the central stairway, the same path the governor once walked with his retinue. At its base lay a pile of broken servo skulls, their lenses cracked, fluids leaking like tears. One of them twitched as they passed, its vox speaker letting out a faint, static whisper. "He comes, the patient saint." Halbrecht froze. "Repeat that." The skull flickered, its remaining lens focusing briefly. Then, in a wet, gurgling tone, it rasped. "The patient saint watches through the rust. He waits for the faithful to kneel." The skull's eye burst in a flash of green light, splattering foul ichor across the marble. They ascended in silence. At the top of the stairs, they found the governor's chamber. The door had been sealed with melted metal, but something or someone had torn through it from the inside. The room beyond looked more like a chapel than an office now. Every inch of wall was carved with spiraling symbols of decay and renewal, alternating between imperial script and something older. In the center of the room sat the governor's throne, though it was barely recognizable. It had grown, metal and bone intertwined, pulsing faintly. On it sat the corpse of Farthest Corran, though his face was hidden beneath a shroud of glistening tendrils. His chest still moved, shallowly, as if breathing. Halbrecht approached cautiously, reciting liturgy under his breath. "By the Emperor's light, I cleanse you of shadow. By his will, I cast out corruption." Corran's head tilted slightly, as if hearing him. A voice issued from the shroud, not through air, but through vibration. "Too late, priest. Too late to cleanse what has become perfect." Vera raised her bolter. "Say the word, Father." Halbrecht shook his head slowly. "Speak, sinner, what has been done here?" The voice gurgled a sound that might have been laughter. The breath of renewal. The infection was a message, a sermon. He showed us the beauty of decay. "We are not dying, priest. We are becoming." Halbrecht stepped closer, holding his staff before him like a cross. "Who is he?" The corpse's chest split open like wet parchment. Inside, organs pulsed around a growth of luminous green crystal, carved in the shape of a three-eyed skull. The voice grew deeper, echoing from every surface of the room. "He who gifts life through rot, he who turns suffering into song. You call him demon, we call him father. You call it plague, we call it salvation." The lights in the room flickered. The walls began to move subtly, then visibly. The infection itself was alive, pulsing in rhythm with the governor's voice. The tendrils slithered along the floor, reaching toward Halbrecht's boots. Vera fired. The bolter shell struck the governor's corpse square in the chest, exploding it in a burst of gore and steam. The voice howled, not in pain but in fury. The infection recoiled, then surged outward in a wave. The chamber shook. "Fall back," Halbrecht shouted. They ran down the corridor as the walls bulged, spewing sludge. Behind them, the throne erupted, a mass of writhing flesh and metal reaching out like claws. The palace screamed, a sound of steel and bone tearing together. They burst through the front gates just as the upper spire collapsed inward, releasing a geyser of green mist. The shockwave threw them to the ground. Halbrecht looked up. The palace was melting, its stone liquefying into a glowing pit. From its depths, something vast began to rise, not fully formed, not yet born. He could see a shape beneath the haze, wings of metal and rot, a face like a bloated cherub's mask, and 1,000 whispering mouths. The infection wasn't just spreading, it was gestating. They staggered back to the shuttle. As Vera prepped the engines, Halbrecht stood in the open ramp, staring at the rising horror. For a brief moment, he thought he saw faces within its folds, the miners, the governor, the children, all smiling in serene ecstasy. Vera yelled over the comms, "We need to leave now." But Halbrecht didn't move. The whispers filled his head again, softer this time, almost kind. "Stay, priest, you serve life, we are life everlasting." He gritted his teeth and pressed his rosarius against his forehead. "I serve the Emperor, and he alone." He raised his staff, its golden light flaring like a small sun. A beam of purified flame burst from the weapon, scorching the air. The entity shrieked, recoiling back into the collapsing palace. The air crackled with the smell of burning corruption. Vera pulled him into the shuttle, sealing the hatch. The sanctity of dawn roared upward into the diseased sky, engines screaming. Through the viewport, Halbrecht watched as the entire palace imploded, a green explosion blooming like a flower of decay. As they ascended, he sank into his seat. His armor was slick with slime, his soul heavy with dread. "Father," Vera said quietly, "was it a demon?" He stared out at the dark clouds, where lightning flickered green and sickly. "No," he murmured, "not yet, but it will be." He looked down at his hand. A small blister had formed where the infection's tendril had touched him. It pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat. The ship drifted through the void, like a wounded animal. The sanctity of dawn was never meant for long-distance flight, yet it tore through the warp currents in silence, its hull blackened by rot that even vacuum could not cleanse. The Jella field sputtered weakly, faint distortions of reality shimmered across the deck plates. Inside the passenger hold, Father Halbrecht sat in darkness. His armor was cracked, his robe stiff with dried ichor. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the aquila carved into his rosarius, but the prayer did not come. The words, once his weapon, his shield, felt hollow now. Sister Vera moved mechanically through the cabin, checking the auspex, adjusting the warp stabilizers, muttering binary litanies through her vox. The servitors at the helm had long stopped responding. Their cogitator ports blinked faintly with greenish light, like eyes infected by disease. "Jealous stability at 63%, Vera reported. "We won't make it to Terra relay range, Father." Halbrecht nodded absently. "Then we make for the nearest beacon. There's one, outpost station Sigma IX, near the asteroid belt." "Set course," he murmured. She hesitated. "Father, the infection, you saw how it spread. If it's aboard this vessel." Halbrecht cut her off with a weary wave. "If it is aboard, then it is already within us." The silence after that was thick. He turned to the viewport, staring into the green-streaked whirl of the warp. The currents moved strangely, like fluid flesh, pulsing in rhythm to some hidden heartbeat. For a fleeting instant, he thought he saw something looking back, a colossal face forming out of the eddies of unreality. Its smile was serene, familiar. He blinked, and it was gone. The outpost came into view after 3 standard hours, a skeletal structure orbiting a nameless moon, its vox arrays long since corroded. A beacon pulsed weakly, broadcasting the same signal in endless repetition. Sigma IX listening post, automated distress, crew deceased, enter at risk. They docked regardless. The airlock hissed open to reveal a corridor coated in frost and dust. The lights flickered with faint green undertones. Vera moved ahead, bolter raised, while Halbrecht followed, holding his staff before him. The silence was wrong, not the stillness of abandonment, but the muffled quiet of something waiting to breathe. They entered the main command deck. The chairs were filled. At first glance, it looked as though the crew were still at their posts, but their faces were hollowed, their bodies shriveled, skin stretched thin across the bones. Cables had grown into their flesh, merging man and machine into a single grotesque tableau. Their fingers still twitched across dead consoles. "Emperor, preserve us," Vera whispered. Halbrecht approached one of the corpses. The officer's face was frozen in a grimace, but his vox grill flickered with faint static. When Halbrecht leaned closer, it spoke not in the man's voice, but something wet and layered. "He breathes through us now." Vera fired a burst from her bolter. The shell tore through the corpse, splattering foul rot across the deck. The whispering stopped, but only for a moment. Then, from every vox speaker in the room, came the same gurgling chorus. "The patient saint watches through the rust, the garden blooms." The words echoed down the corridors, through the ventilation shafts, until it seemed the entire station was murmuring. Vera aimed at the ceiling, finger trembling on the trigger. "It's the same voice, Father, from the palace. How could it have spread here?" Halbrecht didn't answer. His mind was already racing through prayers of warding, litanies of purity, every ritual of exorcism he had ever learned, and finding none that fit. This was no demon that could be named. This was faith, corrupted into infection. He touched the Rosarius again, and flinched. The charm was warm, too warm. They reached the station's chapel an hour later. It was small, meant for a handful of officers, little more than a metal alcove lined with purity seals. But the air was wrong here too. The seals had peeled away, their wax melted into green drips. The shrine to the Emperor had grown. Not through human hands, but through something else. The metal had warped and twisted upward, reshaping into a form vaguely humanoid, yet bloated, bulbous, and smiling. A false idol had sprouted in the place of the Emperor, its eyes two black pits oozing green light. Halbrecht sank to one knee, his mind shattering under the sight. Even here, even in his house. Vera raised her bolter, permission to destroy, Father. He nodded, "Burn it, all of it." The weapon roared. Explosive rounds tore into the blasphemous idol, blowing chunks of rust and bile across the walls. The statue screamed, the sound not metal, but living flesh being torn. The floor vibrated violently as green fire erupted from the wounds. Something wet splattered across Halbrecht's face. He wiped it away, blood, thick and dark, but not his own. He looked down at his hand. The blister from before had ruptured. Beneath it, his skin glowed faintly green. They sealed themselves in the control room. Vera ran diagnostics on the engines, trying to prepare for emergency warp jump, but the screens flickered endlessly between error sigils and phrases written in low Gothic. "Do not flee, the garden is generous. Breathe, join, bloom." The Vox system crackled. At first it was static, then a voice clear as crystal. "Father Halbrecht of the Imperial Mission, designation Sol Division 914. You are contaminated. You will remain docked until purification is complete." Halbrecht turned sharply. "Who speaks?" "Magos Dural." The priest's heart froze. "You're dead. I saw your palace burn. You saw the seed. Now you witness the root." The voice carried no malice, only calm satisfaction. "This infection is no plague, Father. It is the Emperor's mercy returned to its natural state. You cling to death, but we bloom." Vera smashed the Vox unit with her bolter. Sparks flew. "Father," she said, breathing hard, "we can't stay. The infection's everywhere. We jump now." Halbrecht didn't move. His reflection in the shattered Vox screen stared back, and in that reflection, his eyes glowed faintly green. He turned away sharply. "Prepare the ship." As Vera left, Halbrecht sank to his knees, clutching his Rosarius. His faith was unraveling like rotten cloth. He could hear whispers in his blood now, gentle, patient, forgiving. "You've served him long enough," they murmured. "Let him rest. Let us take his place." He bit down on his tongue until blood filled his mouth, forcing the words out. "Only the Emperor is holy." But the blood he spat was not red anymore. The warp engines screamed as they powered up. The Jella field flickered between gold and green, holy wards fighting against corruption that had seeped into the metal itself. As the sanctity of dawn tore away from the station, Halbrecht caught a glimpse through the viewport. The outpost, once lifeless, was glowing. Structures pulsed softly, like organs breathing. The station's antennae unfolded into shapes resembling tendrils, reaching toward the ship as if in farewell. And then, in the warp's green haze, a shadow passed over them, enormous, shapeless, whispering in 1,000 voices at once. Vera's voice crackled through the intercom. "Father, we've broken free of the gravity field, setting course for Segmentum Tempestus beacon." She stopped mid-sentence. The Vox went silent. Halbrecht rose, stumbling toward the cockpit. The door opened with a hiss. Vera was still at the controls, but her skin had turned translucent, veins glowing faintly green. Her armor had fused into her flesh, and when she turned her head toward him, her eyes were gone, replaced by 2 pulsing sores. "Father," she gurgled softly, "we are healed." Halbrecht screamed and drove his staff into her chest. The weapon's golden light flared, burning through her corrupted flesh. She didn't resist. She only smiled as she fell, whispering, "Thank you." He stood there trembling, breath ragged, bile in his throat. The engines roared, and the ship lurched violently. Warning runes flared across the displays, warp instability. The infection had reached the heart of the machine. Halbrecht staggered to the Vox console, hands slick with sweat and blood. He activated the emergency beacon. "This is Father Halbrecht of the Ecclesiarchy, transmitting on Soul Relay Alpha 4. The infection is not biological. It is faith itself. It spreads through belief. Do not listen to the whispers. Burn everything." The Vox fizzled. A response crackled through almost immediately. "Acknowledged, Father, we are coming." He froze, the voice, it was his own. The signal repeated again and again, his own words echoing back at him, warped, layered, multiplied until it became a chant. "We are coming, we are coming, we are coming." And through the hull, the whisper of the infection returned, not in rage, but in welcome. "Rest, priest, the Emperor forgives all." The warp swallowed the sanctity of Dawn Hole. The Inquisition warship, Lux Tenebris, emerged from the warp in silence. Its vast hull shimmered with the scars of transit, streaks of frost, and plasma discharge crawling like veins across its flanks. Even before its Auspex arrays recalibrated, the crew could feel it, the faint wrongness of the void. A stillness that wasn't emptiness, but waiting. Inquisitor Maeron Hest leaned over the command lectern, the glow of the holomap painting his gaunt features in pale green light. He was old, his eyes sunken, his mouth fixed in a grim line that had long forgotten how to smile. The emblem of the Inquisition gleamed on his breastplate, half hidden beneath a shroud of incense smoke. "Confirm coordinates," he said quietly. "Confirmed, Lord Inquisitor," answered Captain Vase, his voice trembling slightly. "This is the Vialia system, or what's left of it." The hollow projection flickered, showing a map of dead worlds. Vialia 9, the planet where the infection had begun, was gone, its orbit a cloud of emerald debris. The nearby listening post, Sigma IX, was still present, though distorted, a ring of debris around something pulsing faintly with energy. Maeron narrowed his eyes. "Status of the beacon." "Active, sir. It's been transmitting on a loop since we entered the system." "Let's hear it." The Vox crackled, filling the bridge with a distorted recording. "This is Father Halbrecht of the Ecclesiarchy. The infection is not biological. It is faith itself. It spreads through belief. Do not listen to the whispers, burn everything. The message repeated over and over, each repetition slightly slower, each word more distorted, stretched, almost sung. By the fifth repetition, the voice was Halbrecht anymore. It was layered, fluid, echoing as though spoken by 1,000 throats underwater. Burn everything, burns. Captain Vase shuddered. Permission to silence the Vox feed, my lord. Denid, Mayron said flatly. Let it play. We must know how far it's gone. He stared at the projection, mind turning. The Inquisition had received dozens of such reports across the segmentum, faint signals, corrupted hymns, entire prayer networks vanishing overnight. But this was where it began, the root of it all. He turned to his adjutant, Interrogator Kyra, a tall woman with half her skull replaced by augmetic plating. Prepare an assault detail. I want a full quarantine and retrieval team aboard Sigma IX within the hour. Kyra bowed. Aye, my lord. Shall we activate the purgation servitors as well? Yes, burn anything that breathes. The boarding torpedo struck the hull of Sigma IX like a thunderclap. The impact echoed through the derelict station, stirring the stagnant air. The breach team advanced through the breach, their armor glistening with purification oils, their flamers ignited in sacred fire. Kyra led from the front, a power sword in one hand and a censer in the other. Incense filled the air, masking the stench of decay. The corridors were slick, not with blood, but with something thicker, translucent green, pulsating faintly as though alive. Life signs, she barked. None, interrogator, came the reply, but the air's wrong. Auspex can't make sense of it. It's reading like breathing. They moved deeper. Every wall was covered in thin growths resembling veins. Some pulsed in time with their footsteps, as if the station itself was aware of them. The chapel came first. It was blackened from fire, the remains of Vera's destruction attempt. But amid the ash, something had grown again. The false idol had returned, now larger, its form more defined. The smiling face was unmistakable. Father Halbrecht. The likeness was perfect, his robes, his staff, even the scar across his jaw. The statue's hands were raised as though in blessing, and green mist seeped gently from its mouth. Kyra's lip curled. Burn it. The servitors obeyed instantly, releasing torrents of promethium flame. The idol screamed as it melted, not in sound, but through vibration, the entire deck groaning in agony. The green mist thickened, swirling violently, then dispersed. When the fire subsided, only ashes remained. Yet as they turned to leave, the vox bead in Kyra's ear crackled. Why do you flee my blessing, child? She froze. Identify yourself. You carry his light, you were meant to share it, but you hoard it, fearing the bloom. Kyra's breathing quickened. Source of transmission. Everywhere, whispered one of the tech priests. It's not on any channel, it's in the static itself. A low hum filled the corridor. The walls pulsed. The ash that had been Halbrecht began to move, threads of black dust knitting together, reforming into crude shapes. Hands, faces, words. Faith is infection, belief is contagion, we are the proof. Bolt of fire erupted, cutting the hallucinations to pieces, but they kept reforming. Every echo of sound seemed to feed them. The prayers of the soldiers, meant to ward off evil, only made the shapes stronger. Kyra screamed over the vox, cease all vocalization, no prayers, no hymns, it's feeding on them. The silence that followed was absolute. Only the hum of their armor and the faint squelch beneath their boots remained. Mayron watched the live feed from orbit, his expression unmoved as the visuals flickered. The vox reports were fragmented, but clear enough. The infection was reactive, alive, responsive to vocal resonance, faith made flesh. He turned to his astropath, a pale, blind creature bound in golden chains. Can it spread through psychic thought? The astropath's lips trembled. It already has, my lord, the warp around this system it sings. Maeron gripped the rail, sings. The hymn of mercy, twisted, endless. It does not come from one voice, but from the echoes of every prayer ever spoken here. A silence stretched between them. The Inquisitor whispered to himself, Halbrecht was right. He activated the command sigil on his gauntlet. Prepare the cyclonic torpedoes, purge Protocol Theta Prime. The bridge went still. Captain Vase looked up sharply. Sir, that will destroy the entire system. That is the point. But there may still be survivors. Then may the Emperor judge them pure enough to survive his fire. Vase swallowed hard. Aye, my lord. Below on Sigma IX, Kyra and her team fought their way back to the docking port. The infection had grown faster than any life form had the right to. The very walls began to pulse, extruding tendrils of green flesh that grabbed at armor joints and tore through ceramite. The Vox was filled with screams, not human ones, but the sound of static melting into laughter. Kyra triggered her last flamer charge, burning a path through the corridor. She could see the breach point ahead, but the hull beyond it wasn't metal anymore. It was skin, stretched taut, with veins glowing beneath it. From within the flesh wall, eyes opened, dozens, hundreds, all watching her. Don't you see, the voices whispered, he is merciful, even the void now lives. Kyra raised her power sword, its edge glowing bright blue, in the name of the Emperor. But before she could finish, the air around her vibrated. Her armor's purity seals ignited spontaneously, one by one, each releasing a burst of green fire. Her weapon melted in her hands. The last thing she saw was the face of Halbrecht forming in the wall, smiling, serene, welcoming. Then the world became light. From orbit, the Lux Tenebris unleashed its payload. The torpedoes fell like divine meteors, their descent streaking across the system with trails of gold and green. Impact came moments later. Vialia 9's remains burned anew, a second death. Sigma IX was vaporized instantly. The green light that had pulsed across the system vanished in a heartbeat. The bridge crew watched in silence as the void cleared. Only ashes remained. Maeron exhaled slowly. Emperor, forgive us. The astropath shivered. It's not gone, my lord. He turned sharply. Explain. The creature's milky eyes wept blood. The song, it's quieter, but it's still there, in the echoes of the Vox, in the minds of those who heard the broadcast. Vase swallowed hard. You mean? Yes, the astropath whispered. It's inside us now. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Maeron, voice hoarse, said, set course for Holy Terror, burn all records, quarantine the crew. He looked out the viewport one last time. The stars flickered faintly, greenish-yellow, like distant candles behind diseased glass. And in the silence of the void, beneath the hum of engines and the faint prayers whispered by terrified crewmen, came a single, gentle voice, the voice of a priest who had once believed himself pure. The Emperor forgives all. The Inquisitor closed his eyes. And in that moment, even he couldn't tell whether it was a benediction or an infection. The cradle of mankind, the golden heart of the Imperium, wrapped in the endless hymns of a trillion souls. From orbit, the planet glowed with the light of sanctity, cathedrals stretching into the clouds, endless pilgrim processions winding through the streets like living rivers. Incense smoke rising to drown the sky. To most, it was heaven. To those who had seen too much, it was a furnace, one that burned faith until it became madness. Inquisitor Maeron Hest stood in the shadow of the imperial palace's outer sanctum, his armor heavy with dust from 1,000 light years of exile. The sigil of the Inquisition gleamed faintly on his chest plate, though much of its luster was lost beneath scorch marks. He hadn't slept in weeks. He barely remembered what sleep was. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the whispers again, the song of Violia. But this was Terra, the seat of the Emperor's will. No infection could take root here, that's what he told himself. As he approached the Basilica of Holy Resonance, a choir of servo-cherubs drifted overhead, their mouths sewn open but still producing perfect harmony. The sound was beautiful, too beautiful. It vibrated in his bones. It was the same melody he'd heard before the fall of Sigma X. He stopped mid-step. The hymn was wrong. The notes followed the structure of a standard ecclesiastical psalm, but beneath them, faintly, something else lingered. A second voice layered beneath the first, humming in green tones the human ear shouldn't have been able to detect. "Faith is infection," it whispered, "and infection is faith." Maeron's hand drifted toward his bolt pistol. The servo skulls around him turned in unison, lenses focusing on his face. Then, as if on command, they resumed their song, slightly off-key now, like a chorus sung by the dead. He entered the basilica. The air was thick with incense, so heavy it clung to his lungs. Thousands of pilgrims knelt before the altar, heads bowed, lips moving in silent devotion. The archconfessor stood on the dais, arms raised, his voice booming through the vast chamber. "For through the Emperor's wounds we are purified, through his light we are made whole." Each word reverberated, deep and wet, like something speaking from beneath the flesh. Maeron pushed through the crowd, ignoring the stares. The pilgrims' eyes glowed faintly with a greenish sheen when the candles flickered. Sweat slicked his palms as he climbed the marble steps. "Archconfessor Harvard," Maeron said sharply, "by inquisitorial order, you are to halt the sermon immediately." The preacher turned. His face was calm, too calm. The flesh of his cheeks shimmered faintly, as if translucent. His eyes were pools of phosphorescent green. "My child," Harvard said gently, "you have come to listen, not to silence. Your liturgy is corrupted. I can hear it." Harvard smiled. "You hear him, as we all do now." The crowd murmured behind Maeron, hundreds of voices, then thousands, repeating the preacher's words in perfect unison. "We all do now." The Inquisitor drew his pistol and aimed it at Harvard's heart. "You are infected. Step away from the altar." Harvard didn't move. He spread his arms, palms open. From each fingertip, thin tendrils of green light unfurled, curling in the air like threads of smoke. "The Emperor's voice has changed," he said softly. "He speaks through the rot now, through the cracks of what we thought was holy." The congregation began to sway. Their chanting grew deeper, merging into a single, pulsating rhythm. Maeron fired. The bolt round hit the preacher square in the chest, detonating in a shower of blood and light. The crowd screamed, not in fear, but in ecstasy. As the confessor's body fell, the altar split open, revealing something beneath it. A growth, a mass of veins and bone-like metal, pulsing in rhythm with the hymn. From within it, a voice rose, one Maeron knew too well. "You cannot burn belief, Maeron." Halbrecht's voice. Maeron's mind reeled. He'd seen Halbrecht die, seen his world erased in holy fire. "Every flame you lit only carried the spark further," the voice continued. "You burn the body, but not the prayer." The growth expanded, spilling down the steps like a living wave. Pilgrims fell to their knees, eyes glowing brighter as the infection entered them. Their skin split, revealing veins of bioluminescent green beneath. Some began to sing even as their throats dissolved. The basilica became an orchestra of decay. Mayron stumbled backward, clutching a purity seal and pressing it to his temple. He recited the canticle of absolution through clenched teeth, forcing his voice to remain steady. Through flame we are cleansed, through silence we are delivered. But the words faltered. The air seemed to twist them, reshaping their meaning. Through flame we are born anew. The infection had learned the language of prayer. Mayron activated his voxlink. All Imperial Guard in proximity converge on the Basilica of Holy Resonance. Kill everyone inside. Repeat, everyone. Static answered, then a voice, not the guard. They already kneel, Inquisitor. Mayron turned. The Basilica's massive doors had closed, sealing him in. He was trapped in a cathedral of flesh. Hours passed, or minutes, time had lost meaning. The upper spires of the basilica were now a mass of living tissue. Saintly statues wept green tears, icons of the emperor twisted into grotesque parodies of their former glory. The infection fed on devotion, and on terror, devotion was infinite. The first explosions shook the city. The Imperial Guard, confused and terrified, opened fire on the pilgrims, flooding the streets. Every fallen zealot released spores of luminous dust that drifted upward, entering the lungs of the living. Within moments, they too began to sing. The infection spread faster than any weapon. On the palace's outer walls, Adeptus Custodes locked shields against the surge of infected priests. Their golden armor was soon covered in writhing growths that whispered hymns into their ears. Some resisted. Others laid down their blades, weeping as they embraced the rot that called itself holy. From orbit, the sky over Terra turned green. Mayron crawled through the remains of the basilica's crypts, lungs burning. He had one last weapon, a relic given only to inquisitors of his rank. The blade of the silent oath, forged to sever psychic resonance. If he could reach the heart of the infection, the core that had once been Halbrecht, he could silence it. He emerged into the sanctum. The growth filled the entire chamber now, a colossal sphere of living light. Faces swam across its surface, priests, soldiers, even children, all merged into a single consciousness. At its center stood what remained of Father Halbrecht. His body was a ruin of bone and light, his features half dissolved, but his voice was gentle, still the same man who had once prayed for deliverance. "You shouldn't have come, Mayron, you could have joined us." "You're not him," Mayron spat, "you're what's left after he died." "Then why do you hear me still? Why do you remember my prayers?" Mayron hesitated. He had dreamed Halbrecht's voice every night since Violia. "Because I let you live in me," he admitted. "Then you understand," said Halbrecht, stepping forward. "The Emperor never wanted silence. He wanted unity. The infection is merely completion." The sphere pulsed behind him like a massive beating heart. The song grew louder. Mayron drew the blade of the silent oath. Its edge shimmered with unlight, an absence of sound, of presence, of existence itself. "No more sermons," he said. Halbrecht smiled. "Then come, Inquisitor, let us finish the prayer together." They clashed. The blade cut through Halbrecht's form, and for a moment silence returned. But as the priest's body fell, the heart of the infection screamed. The walls convulsed, flesh tearing away to reveal the planet beneath, a web of green veins spreading outward across Terra's surface. The infection had already merged with the planet's psychic field. Killing the host changed nothing. Maeron looked up. The roof of the basilica was gone, replaced by a swirling aurora of green and gold light. Billions of voices sang in unison, from the lowest hive levels to the highest spires. The sound was beautiful, overwhelming, divine. He dropped the blade. He understood now. The Emperor's light was never pure. It was life, and all life decayed. The infection wasn't corruption, it was evolution, faith made flesh. As his vision blurred, Maeron fell to his knees, whispering words he no longer recognized as his own. Through decay, we ascend. Far above Terra, aboard a watch station on Luna, astropaths screamed as the green aurora reached them. The signal spread faster than warp travel, a hymn carried by every mind that ever prayed. One by one, worlds across the Imperium began to glow. On Cadian ruins, broken guardsmen felt peace for the first time. On dying Forge worlds, the machines began to breathe. On distant agri-planets, the crops grew flesh and sang. The infection became worship. The ecclesiarchy, blind and desperate, declared it a sign of divine rebirth. The Emperor's voice made manifest, they cried. Pilgrims tore out their tongues so they might sing through their blood instead. And deep within the warp, something vast stirred, a presence old and patient, smiling through the madness. The final transmission from the Inquisition archives recorded one last sound before silence consumed all channels, a soft, human sigh. He forgives us. The light over Terra burned green. The song became eternal.